Good afternoon, and welcome to today's Jewish Policy Center webinar. I am Shoshana Bryan, Senior Director of the JPC, and your host. I always tell you during the JPC commercial that we do both foreign and domestic policy. I think today we're doing them all in one cover. What's happening on American college campuses and the move to deport certain visa holders is domestic, but it's domestic because it's here. It's related to our foreign policy, and it hinges on our foreign policy. This webinar will focus more on the domestic side. Who is doing what to whom, and why, and under what circumstances we can do something about it. It's best in that case to have a lawyer with you. Today our guest is Hans von Spakovsky of the Heritage Foundation. Not only is he a lawyer, but a specialist in some of these precise issues. Before we get to Hans and ask him to take the floor, let's do the rest of your JPC commercial. The Jewish Policy Center supports a strong American defense capability, U.S.-Israel security cooperation, and missile defense. As an organization that sits slightly to the right of center, the JPC advocates for small government, low taxes, free trade, fiscal responsibility, energy security, and intellectual diversity and free speech. You can find our work on the JPC website, jewishpolicycenter.org. Right now, you can find the new spring 2025 issue of our magazine, In Focus. It just went up this week. It is a domestic issue. So again, we're shoring up the domestic side of our program. That's jewishpolicycenter.org. Right now, our priority at the JPC is to support the legitimacy and security of the government of Israel against anyone who would deny them, including the UN or any so-called human rights organizations. We support the government of Israel and the IDF in their defense of the people, in bringing the perpetrators of October 7th to justice, and ensuring that Hamas has neither military nor governing power in Gaza in the future, and making Hamas release the hostages, both living and deceased. It's a tall order. But today, we're going to focus closer to home. American college campuses have been boiling for more than a year now, ostensibly to support the Palestinians. But protesters and rioters have cheered for Hamas. They've cheered for Houthi attacks against the Americans in the Red Sea and for Intifada. Some have called for the outright dissolution of the State of Israel. Others have attacked Jews on campus, attacked Hillel buildings, and attacked Orthodox Jews in the streets. And increasingly, protesters have also defaced American monuments and burned American flags, making some of us wonder if this is the residue of the 1960s or a new incarnation of anti-American fervor. Some protesters are students, some are not. Some are citizens, some are here on visas. President Trump has made it clear that his goal is to remove the violent people who are here, as Secretary Rubio says, as guests of the United States and its people. So we're going to listen in a minute to Hans von Spakovsky. He is an he is an authority on a wide range of legal issues, including civil rights, civil justice, the First Amendment, immigration, rule of law, and government reform. He is a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Edward Meese III Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. As manager of the Election Reform Initiative at Heritage, he also studies and writes about campaign finance, voter fraud, voter ID. These are things that we care about a lot, and we'll have to have him come back and do these. He also is a member of the board of the Public Interest Legal Foundation. His analysis and commentary have appeared everywhere you think it ought to, and his series for PJ Media, every single one, was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Hans has testified before state and congressional committees, made presentations to, among other organizations, the National Association of Secretaries of State, the Federalist Society, the National Conference of State Legislators, and the American Legislative Exchange Council. He has taught as an adjunct professor at the George Mason University School of Law. And today we are thrilled to have him with us at the JPC. Hans von Spakovsky, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Shoshana. Let me point out some of the mistakes that critics are making, those who are criticizing, for example, the Trump administration for trying to cancel the student visas, some of the students at places like Columbia who are not U.S. citizens, and those mistakes they're making are very important. First of all, yes, the First Amendment protects freedom of speech. It does not protect physical altercations. It does not protect assaults, attacks, intimidation. And that is what we have been seeing at many universities like Columbia. So it's one thing to peacefully speak and protest. That's covered by the First Amendment, although even that can be restricted. You know, the Supreme Court has said that, for example, the government can put in reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. That's why if you're going to protest in Washington, D.C., you have to go and get a permit. You have to apply and make sure that you're doing it at a reasonable time, in a reasonable place, and in a reasonable manner. Private property owners do not have to extend the same First Amendment rights. Columbia University, as you know, is a private university. To the extent, for example, that these crowds of agitators were non-students, they were engaged in trespassing on Columbia University property. Um, but the most important thing for folks to understand is the First Amendment rights that citizens have. Aliens who are in this country do not have. Their First Amendment rights are severely restricted. The Supreme Court has said that on numerous occasions. And when it comes to students, aliens who are here on student visas, federal immigration law has some very specific provisions that would apply to individuals like Mahmoud Khalil. As you know, he's the graduate student who has been detained. They're canceling his visa. They're trying to deport him. He was one of the key organizers and instigators of what was happening at Columbia University. And again, these were not peaceful protests. All the video shows that. Individuals were assaulted, students were kept from being able to go to school, property damage was inflicted. And if you look at the immigration statute, this is actually 8 United States Code 1227. The Attorney General of the United States can remove aliens summarily who engage in certain acts, criminal activity, for example, that endangers public safety. Well, when you are organizing assaults, criminal trespassing, damage to property, that's criminal activity. Notice it says criminal activity. There's no requirement that you have been convicted in a court of law. If you engage in criminal activity that endangers public safety or national security, you can be immediately removed from the country. On the free speech issue, there's also a provision in this statute that says if you, and let me get the language, if you endorse or espouse terrorist activity or a terrorist organization, you can be removed. So notice again, you don't have to be a member of a terrorist organization. You don't have to financially support, but if you endorse a terrorist organization, you can be removed from the United States. As you pointed out, that's exactly what we have seen at these campuses. Not individuals there talking so much about Palestine and what's going on, but directly supporting Hamas, doing it with signage, doing it in social media posts. To the extent that any alien student was doing that, they can immediately be removed from the United States. Now, the other thing that we saw happening in all of these protests were individuals wearing face coverings, wearing masks while they were engaged in this kind of activity. That is a criminal violation of federal law. Why is that? Well, if you go back to 1870, what was happening in the Reconstruction South? Organizations like the Ku Klux Klan were wearing masks and doing what? Going out and threatening, assaulting, intimidating newly freed African American slaves throughout the South and anyone who supported them, including individuals coming in from the North. To try to stop that, Congress passed what was then called the Enforcement Act. It became known as the Ku Klux Klan Act. And this is a law that's on the books today. It's 18 U.S.C. 241. It's called the Conspiracy Against Rights Act. And it has been used consistently over the past, 150 or more years by the U.S. Justice Department to criminally prosecute individuals who conspire to, and here's the language, injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate any person in the free exercise or enjoyment of any of their rights guaranteed under the Constitution or laws promulgated under the Constitution. The second provision is if you go in disguise on a highway or on private property to engage in the same kind of behavior, you've engaged in a criminal prosecution of the law. Now, obviously, protesters who were wearing masks, who were on private property at Columbia University, who were intimidating, threatening, assaulting students and others, they have violated that law. And you know what's interesting, Shoshana, about this statute is it does not require an overt act. It's a conspiracy statute. So this, to the extent that any individuals like Mr. Khalil organized and instigated these kind of attacks, this kind of intimidation, they have violated the law. Now, this could have been and should have been enforced by the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. The Civil Rights Division, I actually spent 4 years working there. The Civil Rights Division is responsible for this statute. They actually have a criminal section that enforces this law. The punishment, it can be very severe, up to 10 years in prison and substantial fines, and yet they failed to do so. And I got to tell you, I don't see much difference between what these students or so-called students were doing and what was happening at Southern universities like the University of Alabama in the 1960s when George Wallace stood in a doorway trying to prevent African-American students from being able to attend, and all kinds of things just like this were going on down there. That law was used to try to stop that behavior, to criminally prosecute those who were trying to prevent these students from going to school, and it should have been used here. The Biden administration refused to do that.
So I have two sorts of sets of things in front of me. One is a listener question, and I'm going to read it to you as he gave it to us, because I think listeners get first shot at everything. Anti-masking laws are on the books of 25 states plus federal government, but they have not been enforced at all. I agree, this is the listener, that they should have to the full extent of the law. But is it justified to retroactively apply that law? Going forward, yes, but not sure we could do it retroactively. I'm not sure why it would be retroactive, but can you address that? If we haven't enforced it before, maybe we should give people warning before we enforce it now. I'm not sure how that works.
Well, the particular law I'm talking about, 18 U.S.C. 241, this has been consistently enforced by the Justice Department on other occasions. I mean, the weirdest thing about all this, I actually find it kind of bizarre, is that at the very same time that the Justice Department was refusing to enforce it against these individuals. I mean, I don't want to call them protesters. I mean, they were agitators, they were rioters, they were people engaging in mayhem. At the same time, the Justice Department was refusing to enforce this against these individuals at places like Columbia University. They actually used this statute. It was in one of the counts used to prosecute Donald Trump.
Oh, wait a minute. When did that happen?
The
Would you
the
explain that?
the criminal indictment of Donald Trump that was filed by Special Counsel Jack Smith in Washington, D.C. over what happened on January 6th included uh, a claimed violation of the statute that I'm talking about, the Conspiracy
Oh,
Against Rights statute.
okay. That's a connection I just would not have made. But so what you're telling our listener then is basically this has been enforced and
Yes,
therefore should continue to be enforced.
it should. And look, the general statute of limitations for federal crimes is usually 5 years. Well, everything that's been happening at these universities, particularly the assaults and intimidation, has certainly happened within the last 5 years. There's been no running of the statute of limitations, and certainly the immigration statute that I talked about, which allows our attorney general and the president, therefore, to immediately cancel the visas of students who are here who are engaging in this kind of behavior. Uh, Everyone should remember that they are guests in our country. They do not have the same extensive constitutional rights that the rest of us have. And that difference is just too often lost in all of the discussions about this.
That's one thing that I think is lost. Absolutely, that people feel that if you get here, you're the same as a citizen, but you're really not, are you? The
No,
other thing that seems to be lost is that President Carter did something that, in my mind, resembles this. After the Iranians um, took the U.S. Embassy in 1979 and held American citizens hostage in the embassy, he canceled a lot of visas for Iranian people and he deported people. And how did that work? And why did people not seem to have a problem with that, but they have a problem today?
well, I'm not quite sure why people have a problem with that today. Uh, uh, we have all kinds of other deportations going on, and almost all of them are individuals who have standing deportation orders.
Mhm.
So it's not as if anyone who claims their due process rights have not been observed. They're just wrong. They've been through the immigration court system. An immigration judge has said, I've examined and reviewed your case. You do not have a right to be in the United States. That's the vast majority of the aliens so far that have been picked up and deported. Also, many of them are individuals with criminal convictions on their record. And again, there's a federal immigration statute that specifically lays out a whole series of crimes that if you commit them as an alien in this country, whether you're here, legally or illegally, particularly if you're here legally, you are immediately deportable. Immigration officials can pick you up and get you out of the country. I don't know if you saw this, but the attitude of, for example, some local officials is just astonishing to me. Just within the past week, ICE detained and picked up an alien in Boston as he was leaving the city court there. This is a man that has prior drug convictions that is in the country illegally. A local judge there was so angry that this alien had been picked up that he held an ICE agent in contempt, and he's ordered the local district attorney to investigate and potentially prosecute this ICE agent, for picking up an illegal alien. He apparently must have failed Constitutional Law 101 because, we have something called the Supremacy Clause in our Constitution. It says that federal law overrides state law. Not only that, but local prosecutors cannot criminally prosecute a federal agent who is carrying out his duties to enforce federal law. And yet that is the kind of reaction we're getting, in my mind, bizarre reactions from some local officials.
So I did hear this story. I understand the ICE agent has been released as of this morning or something, but it leaves the question, how do judges do this? I mean, you have judges. There was a judge this week in Los Angeles who has said that he forbids the deportation of any Venezuelans. That's it. There are 300,000 Venezuelans, somebody said. And he said, well, you can't deport them. I'm the judge. You can't. How do they do this? And who can
Well,
make them stop?
well, that brings up the whole issue that we have of these federal district court judges issuing nationwide injunctions and interfering with what the
Talk about
executive
that.
branch
Yes.
is doing. That is a real problem. First of all, most of these judges are acting far outside of the law and far outside of the rules that the Supreme Court has set out for nationwide injunctions being valid. They're almost never valid when issued by a single district court judge. The way this has got to be solved is appellate courts stepping in and stopping this. And if they don't, the Supreme Court is finally going to have to step in and do something about this. Now, there is legislation currently being talked about in Congress that would help remedy this situation by saying that any kind of challenge to, for example, an executive order of the president would not be handled by a single judge. And it would be handled by a three-judge panel with a direct appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. That's actually a good idea. That would help short circuit what's going on. And particular, look, these cases, these orders are being issued by like a judge in Los Angeles, a judge in Northern California. Well, Washington, D.C. and these federal agencies, they're not located in Northern California. The Venezuelans who were deported were being detained and held in a facility in Texas, which is far outside the jurisdiction of a federal judge in Los Angeles. That shows you that, quite frankly, that these are rogue judges acting outside of the legal authority that they have.
But they seem to be, first of all, the ones that get all the attention. And I imagine that a judge who simply does the things the judges are supposed to do gets very little attention. And it raises the question, do you have to wait for it to get to the Supreme Court? Now, this idea of a three-judge panel and then taking it directly to the Supreme Court seems like it would save us a bunch of time.
Yes.
But the Supreme Court so far hasn't seemed interested in dealing with any of this, are they?
Well, no, that's true. About 3 weeks ago, there was a case that got to the Supreme Court on an emergency appeal. This was over a Manhattan federal judge, who, by the way, is a dual citizen.
Wait
He's
a
just,
minute. Because,
I know, I saw that and I couldn't believe it. Apparently, he's a dual citizen of the US and Canada, which seemed very odd to me. But anyway, he issued an order telling the federal government that $2 billion that USAID had been told not to pay out, that the federal government was ordered to pay that money out within 36 hours. Now, again, he had no authority to do that. This ended up on an emergency appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. Unfortunately, in a 5-4 decision with the majority written by Chief Justice John Roberts, Roberts said, well, we're not going to take the case at this time. We're going to let it work its way through the lower courts. Well, there was a scathing dissent written by Justice Alito, joined by three other justices, saying that he was stunned that the court did not take the case because the idea that a single district court judge acting far outside of his jurisdiction had the authority to order the U.S. government to pay out $2 billion of taxpayer funds that they probably would never be able to get back was just crazy. And he couldn't believe that the court hadn't taken the case. I hope that might make the Chief Justice rethink what he did, and on these other emergency appeals, as they start getting to the court, that they actually step in and stop the misbehavior that's going on across the country.
so what happens when the Supreme Court declines to take the case and Roberts essentially says, I'll wait until it comes up the channels? What happens to the money? Have we had to spend it?
I don't think it's been paid out yet, but that
Oh,
actually is a
good.
very that's a very good question because here's the other thing that these judges are failing to do. Um, there is a federal rule of civil procedure which says that anybody seeking an injunction has to put up a bond
Oh,
equivalent to the potential damages of the defendant if it turns out later that the injunction is overturned. None of these judges have been requiring this, even though it's required by federal law. And so in this case we were just talking about, the plaintiffs in that case, they should have been required to put up a $2 billion bond, and the judge did not do it. That was, to me, judicial misconduct by that judge.
so let me ask a kind of political question. And if you don't want to answer it, that's okay because
Sure.
we don't generally do politics around here. Um, Judges are elected in some cases, judges are appointed in some cases.
Right.
There was, it seems to me, a huge rush toward the end of the Biden administration, or let's say during the Biden administration, to put a lot of judges in place. Is there any way to vet them for their politics? Is there any way to find judges who will apply the law rather than applying their own goals and desires? Because I think what you see here is judges who say, well, I want that USAID money to go out, so
Right.
I'm going to rule that they have to put it out. I don't want to see people deported, so I'm going to protect them. Is there a way for us as citizens of the United States to protect ourselves from judges like that? And I know that's a political question, so if you don't want to go there, that's okay.
Well, no. In fact, well, you're right about the rush for judges. A lot of people don't realize during Donald Trump's first term, he got nominated and confirmed more judges than any other president in a 4-year term. And at the end of the Biden administration, Chuck Schumer was intent on beating that record. And so in the last few weeks, in November and December, they rushed through enough judges so that Biden now holds the record for the largest number of federal judges appointed. He beat Donald Trump by one judge.
Of course,
But
because one is all it takes, right?
yeah, but look, judges have tenure for life. And what that means is you have to be better at the selection process when you are first coming up with who you're going to appoint to the bench, because once they're on, it's almost impossible to do anything about it other than overturn them when they make bad decisions. And as you probably know, one of the worst appellate courts in the entire country is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. I think they hold the record for being overturned the most by the U.S. Supreme Court of any court of appeals in the country.
Uh, There's a great record to hold. That's a great record to hold.
Right.
Okay, so among things that could perhaps get one, excuse me, could perhaps get one removed, or at least removed from certain cases. Um, what about a judge that has a personal interest in a case? Now, some of this is just people who think something, so they say something. But there is one judge whose name I have forgotten. I should have written it down. It should be sitting in my notes, but it isn't. Who is doing this deportation stuff, and his wife and daughter both receive money from the federal government for grants. And it seems to me that if you have a president who is, um, I don't know, I don't want to say stingy, but who's kind of cutting back on federal grants to lots of
Right.
things, and a judge whose family is who wants those grants, he is going to be less inclined to rule in favor of the president or the president's administration or the president's desires. And I think you're seeing some of that. How do you go about saying, wait a minute, you shouldn't have this case? Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, there is. There's a judicial code of conduct that applies to federal judges, including district court judges and judges on the courts of appeal. There's a set of different rules. One of them that's most applicable to this is that a judge, if he or a family member has a personal financial interest in a case, then they definitely have to remove themselves. The other rule is that um, if there is an appearance of impartiality, if because of some connection to the case or the parties in the case, a reasonable person would believe that there is a problem with their impartiality, that's basically the language in it, the judge should remove himself. But that's up to the judge to do that. The only
Ah,
way you can contest that is if you're a party in the case, you have to file a complaint letter with the chief judge of whatever circuit that federal judge is in, complaining that you believe they are violating, one of the canons of the Judicial Code of Ethics, and the chief judge is then supposed to investigate and determine what to do about it. But that happens rarely. Now, this did just happen in one case. If folks recall, a federal judge just recently, Judge Anna Reyes, issued an order and an injunction against the Pentagon and the Department of Defense, saying that the new rules that DOD had put in about transgender members could not be enforced. The Justice Department actually filed a letter claiming she engaged in ethical violations because of the way she behaved herself in the courtroom. During oral arguments, she made all kinds of insulting remarks and actually questioned and quizzed, if you can believe this, the Justice Department lawyer about his religious beliefs.
wow. I thought we're not supposed to do that here.
No, you're not. That is a violation of the Judicial Code of Ethics. So the Justice Department actually has filed a complaint letter with the chief judge about her misbehavior in that case. Now, that didn't stop her from issuing her lengthy order with an injunction against this military policy. But the Justice Department has tried to start the ball rolling on her, what they say is her misbehavior.
Sounds like misbehavior to me.
Well, it did to me. It is to me too. When I read the transcript, I couldn't believe that a federal judge, was saying the things that she was saying.
Okay, but let's go the other way. Isn't it better when these people expose themselves? I mean, whatever she thought about the lawyer's religion, whatever nasty assumptions she made about his religion informing his legal case, maybe it's better to get it out on the floor and know who she is rather than let her hide it. And I don't know. It just,
Well, yeah, I mean, I
now we
think,
know something about her.
yeah, we do, and I would hope that the chief judge of the circuit will, one of the things that the chief judge can do when there's an ethics violation is uh, they can issue letters of criticism. They can pull judges off cases. There are various steps they can take if they find that a judge really has violated the code of ethics.
That one's right out there, it seems to me. Okay, we have another note from a listener that says the Jewish group Beitar has been using facial recognition technology to identify people, I'm presumably people on campus doing things, and pro-Hamas types. People, including civil libertarians, are objecting that fundamental freedoms are endangered by ICE making use of this information. So people are turning information over to ICE, including facial recognition technology. Is that a violation of somebody's freedom? And if not, why not?
How's that any different than you being out in public, engaging in a protest where there are news cameras there from ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, recording your image. When you're engaging in that kind of behavior, yeah, you don't have a right to privacy. And in fact, federal law says if you're wearing a mask and you are violating that federal statute, you are potentially engaging in criminal behavior. And by the way, many states have similar statutes to the federal law to prevent individuals from masking themselves and disguising themselves when they're engaging in this kind of behavior.
So that would go along with another question that someone sent in. There are groups like Mothers Against Campus Anti-Semitism that are calling for students to file complaints with ICE about student supporters of Hamas. What is it that, first of all, it seems to me then that that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. What other ways are there for individuals, and especially people on campuses, who feel that their rights have been violated? What do they do? Um,
Well, there's a whole series of things. I mean, the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice has an education section, and their job is to investigate violations of the law and violations of individual civil rights. A student who is being subjected to harassment, intimidation, threats at any university for different reasons, including their religion or their ethnicity, that's a violation of federal law. And those students should complain to not only the university, because the university is supposed to have a process that investigates and takes care of this, but they should also complain to the U.S. Department of Justice about this. You now have a civil rights division who's actually interested in investigating these kind of things. We've seen that from the actions that they've taken. If an individual that you are complaining about, the student you're complaining about, is not a U.S. citizen, if they're here on a guest student visa, I don't see any problem at all with complaining to ICE. In fact, you should complain to ICE because, again, someone who's a guest in the country should not be engaging in this kind of behavior. If they are, they shouldn't be a student here.
So since you might, if you're a student, not know if that person is here as a guest or a citizen, I guess it's still okay to let ICE know and let them figure it out. But I think what you're really saying is that the Justice Department is the place and civil rights law is the
Yep,
place to go to make the complaint.
that's right.
Uh,
And look, I mean, those are the government places to go. As I'm sure you know, there are a number of uh, advocacy organizations that also have been gathering students together and filing private lawsuits against universities like Harvard and elsewhere because of the fact that they failed to take steps to protect not only Jewish students, but other students also from what was going on.
is the Esther Project one of those for
Is
our listeners? The Esther Project was started by the Heritage
uh,
Foundation, where
yeah,
Hans is.
yeah, no, I think they are one of the ones. And the Brandeis Center too, which I think Ken Marcus heads,
Ken
is
Marcus.
working on these cases.
Yes, we've had Ken Marcus on the show, and he's
He's
great.
a he's
Um,
he's a great guy. I've known him for many years, and he's intensely interested in doing something about this.
So then in your view, I mean, you are, and Ken Marcus is, and these organizations are, we're now into the second full academic year of these protests. They started in November of 2023. We're in April of 2025. Um, what's the result of the protests against the protesters? Are we seeing less disruption on campuses? Are we seeing people paying a price for this? So far, I don't see much of a price being paid.
Yeah, but keep in mind that where what are we? We're only beginning of April, right? The
All right,
the new there have been new folks in charge of the U.S. Justice Department now for only 2 months.
that's true.
There have been new folks in charge of Department of Homeland Security for only 2 months. Yet in that time, I just saw the latest numbers. Department of Homeland Security has already deported 100,000 illegal aliens, almost all of whom had criminal records here, and they've started picking up students, alien students who are here on visas who have been involved in the kind of assaults and intimidation and threats we were talking about. People who have made clear that they support a terrorist organization. And like, we got to emphasize this. When you're out supporting Hamas, you're supporting an organization that has been officially found by the U.S. State Department to be a terrorist organization since, is it 1997? A long, long
Okay, yeah.
time. So you can't claim somehow ignorance of what you are doing. And uh, we're seeing the videos of these individuals being picked up. So I actually think in 2 months, there's been a lot accomplished. And you can see that universities are now being threatened with not getting hundreds of millions of dollars in education funding because of their refusal to do anything about the anti-Semitism on campus. And you see universities are reacting to that.
In which case they might have to spend their own multi-billion dollar endowments. I mean,
Yeah,
wouldn't
that's
that be
right.
awful? All right, wait, I got to back up because you just said that in the couple of months that we have had the current administration with its particular attitude about 100,000 people we've deported. Is that for real?
Yeah, 100,000 aliens have been deported.
I feel safer. I'm serious because my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that they were going to go after first people with criminal
That's right.
backgrounds, people that we know are criminals, not just, some guy trying to make a living,
Right.
right? So we should all feel better, right? We should all feel like we're a
Yeah.
little safer. Wow. That's very, that's, I have to say,
By
that's
the
pretty
way,
amazing.
look, that 100,000, the latest number I saw of unenforced deportation orders from federal immigration judges is 1.5 million.
Wow.
It's
Okay.
huge because, see, what was happening during the prior administration was the immigration court system was chugging along. Judges would hold hearings. They would determine that a particular alien was illegally in the country. They would issue a deportation order. It would go over to the Department of Homeland Security, and you know what the Department of Homeland Security would do with it?
I
Nothing.
don't know.
So just just taking care of that one problem. Again, these are all aliens who had all of their due process rights. They
Mhm.
had a hearing. They got a chance to present their case. A judge said, no, you're not entitled to be U.S. Just taking care of that problem, 1.5 million deportation orders, is going to be a lot of work, and just getting that done will be a big accomplishment.
Well, I would say so. That is one of those things that you never see in the newspaper.
No, you
Regardless
don't.
of what newspaper you read, you're not saying that.
Right.
Um, but that's really an amazing thought. So at the same time, we're closing the southern border. We are preventing people from coming into the country, some of whom would be perfectly nice people, and some of them would not be perfectly nice people. And at the same time, we are deporting people that we already are clear we don't want to have in this country.
That's
Um,
right. Yeah, the the drop at the southern border, the latest number I saw on that was um, illegal crossings are down by over 95%.
wow.
Which remember, folks, just a year ago we're saying, well, it's just impossible. You can't stop
Right.
it.
Right. So we have had a guest, and I say this for the people who are listening today. Todd Bensman, some of you remember him, some of you are reading him in the current issue of In Focus Quarterly. Todd has made a living down there on the southern border, watching people come and watching people go. And he would confirm that idea that we've gone from what he called tidal waves to not very many people.
Right.
Um, Although I would point out, and I don't know if this is at all in your realm, Hans. At the end of the day, the problem down there is cartels, and it's
Yes.
people who are armed, and it's people who are dangerous, and people who would just as soon kill you as
Right.
not kill you because there's a lot of money involved in this. um, are conceivably we will be at war of a sort on our southern border. And the Mexicans are helping. The Mexicans are with us on this. And I say that happily. Can we cross that border going the other way to take care of our security needs?
Well, I tell you, I have no doubt that right now there are um, individuals at the National Security Council and the Department of Defense and other federal agencies trying to determine the best way to go after the cartels. That was something that basically the prior administration had a hands-off attitude on. But you're right, they are the ones driving not only human trafficking across the border, but they are the ones responsible for the fentanyl smuggling and terrible crisis we have across the country. The president has said that he's going to target them and he's going to do something about them. What they're going to do, I have no idea, but I have no doubt they're considering all of the different options, which is one of the reasons, as you know, for example, that the president has designated certain of these criminal gangs as terrorist organizations. Because if you look at the kind of killing, brutal killing going on in Mexico, they are terrorist organizations.
They are. The president's also referred to it as an invasion of the
Yes,
United States, Venezuelans, and specifically the cartels and the fentanyl. And I guess that gives him a certain different position legally in terms of ending it. If we are being invaded, we have certain rights to defend our border,
right.
even with the military.
Yeah, it does. And look, that's one of the big issues that is going on right now. Emergency appeal is now before the U.S. Supreme Court. In the case where he deported members of this Venezuelan criminal gang, which he also designated as a terrorist organization, and he used the um, Alien Enemies Act, which is a statute from the 1790s, to deport them. We have a big fight going on in that case in court because a judge tried to order him to turn the planes around to bring these criminals back into the United States. And the president has not done that. And it's now on an emergency appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. Justice Department is trying to get the court to dissolve the injunction issued by this lower court judge.
I always I tried to figure out how that would work. Like you're on Southwest Airlines and you're flying to Florida, and all of a sudden they say, no, back to New
You
York.
got to go
It's like,
back, right?
doesn't work. Question from a listener. Is there legal action that might be taken against U.S. NGOs that aided and abetted the influx of illegal aliens while taking federal funding? In other words, taking U.S. taxpayer money, while, first of all, abetting the illegal immigration, also trying to help to keep them there. But that would apply to the Hamas people as well, right? So
Yeah.
is there a way to go after these
Yeah.
NGOs?
Yes. There's a federal immigration statute. Actually, folks want more details. I recently published a paper about this.
So let me say, if you'd like to send us that paper, we'd like to read it, and
Sure.
and we can post it. So if you're listening to the program and you want to know what Hans has had to say, we're going to get it for you.
Right. But in essence, there's a federal statute that makes it a criminal violation of the law to hide, harbor, shelter, transport illegal aliens. And so therefore, if for example, I don't know if you all remember this, but a little while ago, the governor of New Jersey intimated at a press conference that he was sheltering an illegal alien at his house. His spokesman the next day said, "Oh, no, he's not doing that."
I remember that.
You
Yes.
remember that? Okay. Well, if let's assume for just a second, hypothetically, that was true. Uh, if he knew that the person was in the country illegally, and if he was sheltering and hiding him, he could have been criminally prosecuted. And the fact that you are a government official doesn't matter. It doesn't give you immunity. And certainly, if you are the head of an organization, for example, that is knowingly transporting aliens who are in the country illegally, yeah, you could be prosecuted for that. And I think if you're getting federal money, yeah, I think the feds can cut that off. But the point is, no one in this country, whether they are working for an NGO or whether they are a local or state official, is immune from criminal prosecution if you violate this particular federal statute. And the federal statute has been upheld by the federal courts.
So, as a general matter, what I'm hearing here is we have a lot of laws in place that would make us, I don't want to say a stricter country, but yeah, maybe a stricter country in terms of immigration. It's not all open, it's not all free, it's not all whatever you want, it's not all whatever you say. It's not. So, is it really then more a matter of enforcing laws that we have, or do we need a couple of new ones?
Well, there are things that could be fixed, but the biggest problem we've had in the past is an unwillingness to actually enforce the law. Not only that, but Alexander Mayorkas, the head of Department of Homeland Security in the prior administration, he not only wouldn't enforce the law, he was breaking the law. And
Oh,
the quickest example of that is federal law outlines very strictly who can be, if you're an alien, who can be given a work permit. It's very limited. And if you're in the country illegally, you cannot be given a work permit. And yet the Department of Homeland Security was doing that. So they were actually violating the law. No, it's just a matter of enforcing the laws we have on the books. And if you're willing to do that, you can solve a lot of these problems. You can't solve all of them because there are problems with the statute and there are inconsistencies that need to be fixed. But I think we're seeing right now that if you actually have a will to enforce the law, you can take care of the problem. And a very important point to make, Shoshana, about this is, look, I'm a big supporter of legal immigration. You know,
me too.
legal immigration has made this country a great country. I'm first generation. You know, my parents immigrated here legally and became citizens. But if you support legal immigration, you actually should be on the side of trying to stop illegal immigration because supporting one does not mean that you should allow the other to happen. In fact, if you don't do anything about illegal immigration, you're being very unfair to the legal immigrants who follow the rules to come to this country.
Well, I
So,
think you saw that in the last
yeah,
election where Hispanic voters, voters being
yes,
people who are allowed to be here and cast their votes, um, turned in the direction of the candidate who was saying, you yes, them no. So I'm of the opinion that if we need more people to work in this country, let's give them more visas. If we need more of this, give them that. But it's got to all go through the system. And
right.
I think it's, as you say, it's only been 2 months. I think I'm not quite attuned to the fact yet that we may be in a position where our government takes its own laws seriously. And that will be a good thing for us as soon as I can assimilate that thought.
Right.
Let me catch up with one thing you said. We're coming sort of to the end of the program, but you mentioned the Enemy Alien Act,
Yes.
1790, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yes.
Some people have said, well, that's, 1790. That doesn't matter anymore. Give us in like 30 seconds. What's the Enemy Alien Act and why is it appropriate to use it now?
Well, on dealing with the fact that it's an old law, Tom Homan, you know, the immigration czar that the president appointed, he said, yeah, well, the U.S. Constitution is old too. That doesn't mean it's not still a great document. And that law is still on the books, so it is enforceable. Um, this law, it's not very long, it's very short, but it basically says that um, if the United States is at war with another country or a foreign power, or is being invaded, or there is an incursion by a foreign government or a foreign power, then the president has the ability to remove aliens of that foreign power or foreign government who are in the U.S. Now, the the issue that's come up is, well, how far does the president's power extend under that? Folks have said, for example, with the Venezuelan members of that criminal gang that he deported using that, well, we're not at war with Venezuela.
Okay.
But that's not the provision he used. He used the second provision about an invasion or incursion. And what he did, if you read his executive order, there's an executive order on that Venezuelan gang. People should read it. There's an extensive piece in which he describes the Venezuelan government and the fact that it's been nationally recognized now as a narco criminal state. And this gang, according to the executive order, is basically acting as an agent, as a subsidiary of the Venezuelan government uh, through the kind of drug deals and other things that they are using to support the regime, and that this is part of Venezuela's plan to promote incursions into the U.S. So they do everything they can, the president does, in the executive order to tie this particular criminal gang into the Venezuelan government so that it satisfies the Alien Enemies Act. Um, the Supreme Court, I think, is going to end up deciding whether that's a correct application of the law or not.
Okay. We just have to get it there.
Yeah.
Okay. We're coming to the end of the program. Is there a one-word answer to, now they're all jumping in with questions. Now everybody has a question. Listener says, is there a RICO scenario for the organizers of demonstrations on campuses?
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
is there a what?
RICO.
Oh, against a RICO
Against the organizers of the demonstrators.
oh. Um, RICO, as people know, is the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act. And the way that law works, there's a whole series of potential criminal acts that have to be satisfied before you can then use RICO to go after the organization that has instigated these acts. I, I don't, I don't know whether that could be used. You know, in the past, it's really been used against mob organizations and the more kind of traditional criminal organizations that we all know about and see on TV shows. um, but the conspiracy against rights statute can be used to the extent that anyone could show that any of the individuals or organizations involved in putting all of this together, instigating and organizing this, if they have been involved in supporting terrorist organizations, then you've got even stronger statutes that you can use against them over national security rather than the RICO statute. So I suppose that probably somebody at the Justice Department is looking at that, but I don't know if they'll use that rather than the immigration statutes they've currently got.
Okay. So we've come to the end of the program. And first of all, I want to say to you, thank you. I have learned an extraordinary amount here. I know the people listening have. And for that person who wanted to know if we post this, yes, we do. So if you missed something and you want to go back to it, it will be on our website by tomorrow, maybe this afternoon, by tomorrow. So Hans, thank you for this.
Sure.
People
Happy to
that
do it.
listen know that I like to go out on a high note, which I have to tell you, in the last couple of years, has been very difficult. So I usually pose a question at the end, the answer to which I require that it be positive so that you leave us on a high note. In this case, I've learned so much, I'm not sure how to phrase the question. So if you had a positive thought to leave us with in the field of stopping these people on campuses, creating safe spaces for real students to do real stuff, creating a secure United States, what's the positive thing? What's the optimistic thing you would say to us?
I think we've seen in the last 2 months from the reactions of the presidents of many of these universities that they've had a big bucket of cold water thrown in their face, not only because of um, students, alien students who are involved in violence getting picked up by the government, but threats of withholding hundreds of millions of dollars, private lawsuits against them for not doing enough to stop what was going on. And I think we're going to see a real sea change with many of these universities, particularly because the final thing is um, their admissions numbers are way down. People are not applying to these schools. They are going elsewhere. And that is going to hit their bottom line because they've had, like I said, huge reductions in the number of applications being submitted. Because if you can go to if you can go to a school, a college in the southeast or the southwest or the west where it's normal, you know, people are just there going to school, and you're not going to have to deal with kind of mayhem going on at these places like Columbia and Harvard. Why would you go to school there? And that, I think, is actually a positive note. Americans are doing what they always do. They're voting with their feet.
That's an excellent point. And also, it gives you or me or both of us an opportunity to boost the Vanderbilt Commodores. You're a
Yeah,
Commodore, right? As is my son. So if you have an opportunity to think about the Vanderbilt Commodores, do that. In the meantime, that was a great answer to a sort of weird question, Hans. And I want to thank you again on behalf of the listeners and the people who are going to listen to this later. Thank you for teaching us something about the country we live in and the way it's governed. I appreciate it.
sure thing. Happy to be here.
Thank you.